Could you elaborate on the ways to deal with immediate gratification and procrastination? And to that, I'd like to kind of expand that, because I think that any kind of practice, whether it's a spiritual practice or any kind of therapeutic engagement, you can pretty much tell a person, especially in Buddhism, kind of, here's the here's the Four Noble Truths, here's the Eightfold Path. You can kind of explain to somebody what they need to do in pretty much an afternoon, without all the subtleties. But, then it becomes to how do you maintain that. And Dr. Viveki, you just kind of spoke about agape as being kind of self-sustaining and stuff. But I feel that this is in some ways the biggest fundamental stumbling block to anybody who engages in something with good intentions, and directly ties back into the theme of this conference, which is overcoming desire and transmuting it towards a higher cause.
Could I go first on this?
Absolutely.
But I think let's zero in on the delay of gratification and procrastination. Because there's a lot to be said about that. So I'm going to talk about sort of the aspect of my work that touches on that. I think it is fundamentally a salience issue, because I think one of the big machines that drives procrastination is what's called hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is that as things get further into the future, we exponentially start to ignore them. They lose salience, they lose the ability to grab our attention, to arouse our energy, to cause an affective response. And this is across species. Like, this is an ancient machine, right? And that tells you that it's doing something very important. It's doing something very powerful. And what it's doing is that, as I start to move out, if I do this event, the next event is quite probable. Right? But from that event, there's maybe these events, and then as you go out, the chance that this event is going to occur is really, really low probability. So, if you don't have hyperbolic discounting, you can't get out of bed because, I may twist my ankle, then I'll fall, and I'll damage my face, and then people will laugh at me, and then I'll end up in Buffalo married to a lamp or something like that, right? And you need that to cut off all that stuff. And so it's highly adaptive. Whenever anything has some compulsion attached to it, and I think Jordan made this really clear, it's because it's an adaptive machine in some ways. It's running for a good, deep reason, right? The problem with hyperbolic discounting is it can't pick up on cross-contextual invariance. Like, if I smoke this cigarette, the chances that I'm going to die in Buffalo of lung cancer are very small. Montreal, of emphysema or something, or, mouth cancer here. But the thing about me is I'm not that fussy about death. I want to avoid death, right? And hyperbolic discounting, by blinding me to all of these individual low probability events, blinds me to the cross-contextual invariance. So we need to do override for that. So that's why procrastination is difficult. But there's sort of two things you can do to start to manipulate the salience. One thing you do in a situation is you can delay gratification by actually practicing one of the things that mindfulness does. Look, in mindfulness, normally we're looking through our mind at the world, but in mindfulness what I do is I step back and look at it rather than looking through it. And this is one of the fundamental things you can do. You put a kid down and you put a candy in front of them, right? And you say, the longer you wait, the greater the chance you have another candy. And how do you get them to delay that longer? But this is what you do, literally. You say, pretend that you're putting a frame around that and that you're looking at a picture of a candy, not a real candy. Then they can delay longer because now they're not looking at it, they're not looking through it, they're stepping back and looking at it. You can do the reverse. You can give them a picture of a candy and say, that's not a picture. Think about what that represents. Look through it. And then they really want the candy and they can't delay. So you can teach people, right, to alter salience in a very powerful way so that you can dissolve away that tempting message by getting people to focus on the cognitive medium. But that's not enough because you have to know when to delay gratification. You have to practice going the other way. You have to know, you have to widen your frame, and Meyerson and Fishbach talk about this. You have to know when your short-term self is in conflict with your long-term self. You have to practice expanding your scope of attention. And that's what contemplation does. Meditation helps you do this dissolving that affords delaying, but contemplation helps you with the frame expansion that tells you when you should delay. And if you practice both together, you're starting to do what you need. The way you have to overcome like hyperbolic discounting is you have to sort of chain this identity to the future identity.
One of the things that can help you stop procrastinating, well, let's say two things. I referred to them at the end of my talk. One is to have a really nicely developed vision of heaven. It's like, okay, here's what you need to know. How would your life be? What would it be like if it was really good? And I don't get primitive about that. It's not like, naked supermodels on a yacht. They're too skinny anyways. Anyways, you know what I mean. It's like, yeah, I get it, but it's not agape, say. So it's not sophisticated enough to be self-sustaining. It's a stupid vision, and if you pursue it, you're just going to be on a sinking yacht with like anorexics or something like that. So you need a vision. You need a vision of what your life would be like if it was just the way it should be, if it was best for you, and if you were taking care of yourself with this thing that you kind of described as parental love. Which is a really good way of thinking about it because it's nice and concrete. So what would be best for you 3 to 5 years down the road if you were really taking care of yourself like you were someone that you thought should be around? And people are very ambivalent about whether they should be around, so this is a lot harder than you think. So you need that vision. And then what you also need is a vision of what your life would be like if you let yourself deteriorate in precisely the foolish ways that you know that you would deteriorate if you let yourself go. And that's contemplation too. It's like, okay, if I let myself go, where would I end up? And first of all, this is kind of a shadow realization from a Jungian perspective. It's like, first of all, you could let yourself go. Second of all, you already know exactly how you do it if you did do it. And third, with a little imagination, you can conjure up exactly what that would be like, not only for you, but for your family and for the broader social community. And that would be the whole bloody catastrophe, including all the malevolence that would go along with your deterioration and so on. And so then you've got these stark choices before you. One is agape-oriented equilibration, for lack of a better technical phrase, and the other is something that more closely approximates hell than people even think. Because if you sink low enough, not only do you sink that low, but you are absolutely motivated to drag people down there with you. And it's a nasty, nasty state of affairs. And so if you're really terrified of that, like you should be, because you've drawn the causal connections, and you're really attracted by the other, then when you sit down and you don't do what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, you don't get to say, well, it doesn't matter. And that's the salience landscape issue. It's like, no, no, no. The little voice in the back of your head that says it matters, it sees those outcomes down into the future, and it's telling you that it matters. And if you would like the positive outcome over the negative outcome, which is, like I said, your constant choice, you bloody well better sit down and do what you're supposed to. And so that's really helpful. That'll, I think, you know, what is it? Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's like, yes, that's absolutely right. And the role of things like anxiety and terror in promoting proper development, well, are often under-addressed, because we think of those things as our enemies. It's like, they're your enemies if they're working against you, but they're pretty powerful monsters on your side if you've got them oriented properly.
Wow. Words to live by, maybe.